Today I'm recording what I think is a really important video. I'm conscious that I'm pretty new to BookTube and you're probably still getting some feelers as to who I am as both a reader and a content creator. So in order to give you some useful content, I hope, I want to share what I consider my must-read recommendations. These are books that I will recommend to pretty much anybody, regardless of whether they're your genre or not. That's because they are amazing, they are really, really great books. And there are even some of these books on this list that I considered not for me when I picked them up, but I loved them that much that I think everybody should have a stab at them. So I hope this video is both useful in that it gives you some book recommendations if you haven't picked them up for yourself already, but also it'll give you a feel for who I am as a reader and a content creator, and so you can kind of get to understand what type of content I'm going to be producing and talking about here on my channel. Without further ado, let's get stuck in with my must-read recommendations. I have tried to feature a range of genres in this video, so there should be something for everybody. First, let's start with fantasy. The first, the best, and my all-time favourite series is of course A Game of Thrones. Now this is a series I have talked about extensively on my blog, on my social media channels, and now here on my YouTube channel. Now I appreciate A Game of Thrones probably isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. There are people who have maybe formed some views of it based on the TV series. There are people who may not want to pick it up because it's not a complete series yet. And I absolutely understand all of these viewpoints. However, this is my absolute favourite series, and I think even if you're not sure about this, it's worth giving it a go. Nothing says more how much I love this series than the fact that it is the only series I own each book that's currently published in every single format. Yes, that's physical, ebook, and the audio, although I do have some gripes about some name pronunciations, so it's not my favourite format, but I have the choice. I love the complexity that comes with A Game of Thrones and the character relationships and the scope of the world that's been set out. It is huge, it's amazing, it's fantastic, it's detailed, and there are aspects of this book that you can pick up even when you go and reread the books. You know, there's always something you miss. There are little details you pick up in the rereads, and I don't know how else to convince you that this is a fantastic series. Like I say, I love it. I would describe this as kind of like my desert island read. You know, if there was only one series I could ever pick up for the rest of my life, it would be A Game of Thrones. Another key aspect I really enjoy about this narrative is that the author isn't particularly protective over his characters. Events in this book and series are based loosely on historical events, such as the War of the Roses, and based on its kind of setting, events are kind of true to the history. They're brutal, even to the point where the author doesn't protect what you would consider to be the main characters. Horrible things happen to them, they die, they become seriously ill. You know, that there is no safety in their kind of key role in the storyline, and I absolutely love that. I don't like to go into a book feeling particularly safe or that it'll all work out in the end. That's not the case in A Game of Thrones. Now, whilst I'm only featuring 5 books in this kind of main must-read recommendations, I have got some honourable mentions for some of the genres. First and foremost, if you enjoy A Game of Thrones, there is also further reading by the author. We have the likes of Fire and Blood and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and we can go and explore this wider world, maybe in some different timelines and different detail. However, there are also some other fantasy series that are similar in some of these aspects that I said I've enjoyed, and those include Robin Hobb's The Realm of the Elderling series, which starts with Assassin's Apprentice. We have the Nevernight series by J. Kristoff, and finally, a series I've just started is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Moving on to a contemporary read, I have a particular love for books with a moral dilemma. Now, the book I feature here is one that I picked up as a bit of a stretch goal for myself. And I picked it up because of the particular moral dilemma in this book, and that absolutely made it for me. I'm not a big contemporary reader, however, this book was really engaging, had a really interesting storyline, and it's really quite thought provoking in how it makes you ask questions of yourself. I am talking about My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. If you are unfamiliar with this storyline, we follow a young girl by the name of Anna who acts as a donor for her older sister Kate. Kate has leukemia and has battled with the illness for most of her childhood. In fact, Anna was conceived as a direct donor match, so she has always grown up with this implied responsibility that she was basically there to look after her sister Kate, and she undergoes numerous procedures over the course of her childhood and into her early teens in order to help her sister. But of course, she starts to kind of resent that she's almost second best and that she exists in order to prolong and extend the life of her sister. And she ultimately makes a decision that tears her family apart, in that she starts to doubt whether she wants to fulfill this role anymore. It's not something she particularly consented to. And obviously there's this expectation that she was going to carry on because she's her sister and it's the right thing to do. But actually, Anna's own rights aren't really considered by her parents and those around her up until she gets to an age where she starts to question this for herself. So I love this dilemma that comes out in this book, and obviously things snowball from there, so I haven't really given you anything that's a spoiler. But it's a fantastic read. It's really, like I say, thought-provoking because it has you asking what you would do in that situation. And it's hard to know what you would do in that situation, I think. But this is a fantastic book for making you ask those questions and to really dig into the whys and for and against in both arguments. Again, I have another contemporary kind of second, not quite, it didn't quite make the list itself, but the plot line has almost a moral dilemma element to it. In this particular case, it also has a cultural appropriation kind of link to it, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. If you are a reader or you've followed my content for any length of time, you will know that I love dystopian fiction. And the book I have chosen here is a book that not only lives and breathes in this dystopian genre as a classic, but it also very strongly deals with women's reproductive rights. You probably guessed, but I'm talking about Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Now, this is a book I have read, I will reread again and again. And it's scary that we should be having this conversation in 2026, but it's more important that people pick this book up now, because I think there are examples in our modern society and in countries that are supposed to be a bit more progressive where women's rights are being... what's the word I'm looking for? They're being challenged, they're being restricted, and it's disgusting. Again, I don't understand why we have to have this conversation in 2026, but now it feels particularly relevant to get people to read this kind of fiction. I think The Handmaid's Tale largely speaks for itself, and it kind of stands alone in its genre, subgenre, and its content, so I don't have anything else like this right now, other than the book now has a sequel called The Testaments, which is set a little bit later, and I believe it's from the perspective, if I recall correctly, from one of the, what would you call them? I guess the matrons that look after the handmaids, if you like. I can't remember what the proper term is. But that's also a fantastic read if you want to kind of flip the story and read a slightly different perspective. Now, a book I wasn't sure I would feature on here, but when going through my list of books, I'm like, absolutely yes, falls into the kind of humour, I wouldn't quite say satire, but definitely falls into non-fiction humour kind of category. I'm talking about Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt. Now, this book is about his stories training as a junior doctor, and he has gone on to write some other books from different angles, including 'Twas the Night Shift Before Christmas and Undoctored. So there are other books within this kind of realm that deal with different aspects of his experiences as a doctor within the NHS. But what I love about this book, and would seriously recommend anybody pick this up, is because it is an emotional roller coaster. You will be laughing one minute and crying the next, because it is so honest and profound in its, obviously, humour. Adam is known for being a bit of a comedian nowadays as opposed to a doctor. But of course we get to see some very funny stories of how people end up in A&E and things ending up where they shouldn't. I'm sure you can imagine where I'm going with that. But then we also get to deal with very personal, deep stories about people who are terminally ill, and how Adam and many people like him in the profession, not just Adam, end up helping these people who are very vulnerable in order to either make plans or to come to terms with their illness. Now, like I say, this is an emotional roller coaster. It is not an easy book necessarily, because it deals with some very unpleasant stories. But they're obviously a fact of life. And I don't think we should shy away from things like that, because there are some really profound lessons to learn from reading those perspectives. Finally, I don't think it would be right for me to record this video without recording some World War II based historical fiction narratives, because that's something I read quite a lot of, and I will read a fairly broad spectrum of these. But I would say my favourite series that falls in this category is Heather Morris's The Tattooist of Auschwitz series. I have a bit of a morbid fascination with reading books set in concentration camps. I'm sorry, but I like to learn these perspectives, and obviously to both learn and appreciate kind of what happened to people, with a view for it to not happen again. You know, I'm all for education as prevention for these kinds of atrocities that took place, and I don't think we should be ignorant of these things. What I particularly like about Heather Morris's take on these books is that she goes to quite a length to keep these stories authentic to individual experiences. In fact, I believe each of the books within this series has been shaped by at least one person's true account of their time, if you like, in captivity. Now, yes, there are some, I suppose, deviations to the storyline to keep them, you know, exciting, relevant, and something you want to read, but she will stay as close to this particular person's story as possible to make it authentic, and obviously to really get the personal side across. You know, this isn't just something to read to keep people's attention, get her some awards, and thank you very much, off you go. You know, it's very much a personal thing to, you know, do the right thing, tell the right story, and really make it personal. So that's what I love most about this series. These books are also very descriptive and immersive, and obviously some very nasty things happen to these people. They are imprisoned, they are tortured, they are deprived of food, they get so sick they nearly die, and as it's awful, obviously. But what I really like about the way that Heather tells these stories is that she doesn't shy away from these difficult things, but rather she includes them to educate us as to what it was really like to live in those camps, and that makes it such an immersive read. Another notable mention that I nearly featured here, also set in World War II, although with a little bit of a different emphasis. It doesn't have the Auschwitz or concentration camp leading, but it is also a very profound book, is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. So these are some of my must-read recommendations that I will give to anybody based on their reading preferences. I think all of these books have something to give, and readers have something to gain from picking these up. Have you read any of these before? Are they on your radar? What is your must-read recommendation? Drop a note in the comments, because I would love to hear from you.